Former K9, abandoned and starving, begs for scraps. But what happens next will break your heart. Abandoned and starved, Rex, once a loyal K9 officer, finds himself lost and alone on the streets. Desperate for scraps, his once proud spirit shattered, he's given up on hope. But when Sarah, a kind-hearted woman, takes him in, the healing begins. With each passing day, Rex learns to trust again, discovering a new purpose as a therapy dog. From the darkness of his past to the light of his future, Rex's story is one of resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a dog and the human who gave him a second chance at life. The early morning sun slowly stretched across the sky, casting a soft golden glow on the quiet streets. In a small suburban neighborhood, a bond like no other was forged each day. Rex, a German shepherd, stood proudly beside his handler, Officer Martinez. They had been through countless situations together, their bond growing deeper with each passing year. The dog, once a playful pup, had become more than just a partner. He was family. Rex and Martinez were a well-known duo, famous for their work in law enforcement. Together, they had tracked down criminals, discovered hidden contraband, and ensured the safety of their community. But despite the dangers they faced, Rex was always calm and composed, his instincts sharp. He had been trained to protect and serve, but more importantly, he had been trained to trust his handler, and Martinez had always returned that trust. As Rex and Martinez stood outside the precinct, the officer patted his partner's head, offering a quiet word of encouragement. Rex's tail wagged lazily, his eyes fixed on his handler. Every command, every look was a testament to the deep connection they shared. But that connection was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. A few weeks later, everything changed. Martinez was involved in a car accident while responding to an emergency call. It wasn't a life-threatening situation, but it was serious enough to put an end to his career. He spent weeks in the hospital, his future uncertain. It wasn't just the physical recovery that weighed heavily on his mind, but the emotional toll it took as well. How could he continue on without his loyal partner by his side? Rex, who had always been by Martinez's side, now found himself thrust into an unknown world. Martinez's injury meant that the dog could no longer accompany him on police missions. And as painful as it was, it became clear that Rex's career as a K9 officer was over. The department wasn't in a position to take care of retired K9s, and so the decision was made. Rex would have to leave. Martinez's heart broke as he sat in the shelter parking lot, looking at Rex. The dog's eyes were filled with confusion and loyalty, as if asking, "What will happen to me now?" Martinez wished he could offer more, but the reality was stark. He had no place to keep Rex, and the shelter seemed like the only option, even though it meant saying goodbye to the one creature who had been with him through thick and thin. With a final pat on the head, Martinez said, "Goodbye." "You'll be okay, boy," he whispered. Rex stood still, his eyes following his handler as he turned to leave. It wasn't the kind of goodbye Rex had ever expected. In the moments before the door closed, Rex's tail gave one last wag, faintly, as though it still held hope. As the door shut behind him, Rex stood there in the sterile, unfamiliar shelter, uncertain of what the future held. It wasn't just a physical departure. It was the end of everything he had known. And as he looked around the room, he couldn't help but feel utterly alone. Rex stood in the corner of his new home, staring at the cold, grey walls of the shelter. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, mingling with the cries of other dogs that filled the room. The shelter was far from the home he had once known. The noise, the smells, the constant shifting of cages, everything about it was foreign to him. It was a place where dogs waited for their new homes, but for Rex, it felt more like a prison. He was no longer a K9 officer. He was just another dog, lost in a world that didn't know him or care for him. At first, Rex didn't know what to do. The routines at the shelter were strange to him. Food was given at specific times, but it was tasteless. nothing like the special meals Martinez had once prepared for him after a long day of work. The other dogs in the shelter were either too wild or too frightened to engage with him, and Rex found himself withdrawing even further. He missed his handler's presence, the strength of his voice, the warmth of his hand on his fur. Everything was gone. Days turned into weeks, and still nothing changed. Rex didn't bark to be let out of his cage like some of the other dogs. He didn't jump up to greet anyone when they walked by. He remained motionless most of the time, staring at nothing. Sometimes he would lay on the cold floor, his head resting on his paws, eyes vacant. His once proud stature was beginning to wither, and his fur lost its shine. He had grown thinner, a shadow of the energetic, powerful dog he had once been. Occasionally, one of the shelter workers would come by to clean his kennel. They would talk to him, offering gentle words of reassurance, but Rex could only gaze at them with a look of confusion. He couldn't understand why he had been left here. He had been so loyal to Martinez, but now he was abandoned, forgotten. There was no one to protect, no one to serve. It felt like he no longer had a purpose. One day, a volunteer came to walk him, and for the first time since arriving at the shelter, Rex's ears perked up. She was kind, soft-spoken, and patient. She didn't rush him, allowing him to take his time. Rex was hesitant at first, unsure if he should trust her. But as the walk continued, he began to remember what it felt like to move freely, to feel the breeze against his fur. For a moment, it was as though the weight of the past few weeks had lifted from his shoulders. But it was only for a moment. After the walk, the volunteer led him back to his kennel, and the familiar emptiness crept back in. He was left alone, once more. That night, as he curled up on the cold floor, Rex couldn't stop thinking about the days he had spent with Martinez. He could still feel his partner's voice in his ears, the commands, the praise. Those memories brought a flicker of hope, hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would come for him again. Days blurred into one another as Rex spent his time in the shelter. He had grown used to the rhythm of life there, though it felt foreign and cold. He no longer saw the bustling world outside the cage. His world had shrunk to these four walls, the sound of barking, and the scent of countless other dogs that filled the air. The memories of his work with Officer Martinez haunted him like shadows in the corners of his mind. But today felt different. For some reason, the shelter had a quieter energy, a sort of calm before the storm. As the staff came to care for the dogs, Rex lay in his bed, staring blankly at the steel bars that kept him in. He could hear footsteps approaching, but this time it wasn't the usual noise of staff members passing by or cleaning up after the dogs. This time it was something else. A soft voice came from outside his cage, gentle and patient. "Hey there, boy," the voice called. Rex didn't respond at first. He had learned to ignore most human voices. But there was something about this tone, so different from the others, that caught his attention. The woman's voice was calm, warm, and filled with a tenderness that Rex hadn't felt in a long time. Slowly, he lifted his head and looked towards the door of his kennel. There stood a woman, crouched low so she wasn't towering over him. She smiled gently, a kindness in her eyes that was unlike any he had seen since his days with Martinez. She didn't move toward him immediately. She simply stood there, letting him take his time. Rex, cautious but intrigued, took a few steps forward. His instincts were still on high alert, and he wasn't sure what to make of her. The woman held a piece of meat in her hand, something Rex hadn't had in what felt like forever. His stomach rumbled at the sight, and for the first time since coming to the shelter, Rex felt a spark of interest. He took a tentative step closer. Her hand remained extended, the food just out of reach, giving Rex the space he needed. He looked at it, then back at her. His body was weak, but the hunger was real. He had to make a choice, stay in the safety of his corner, where nothing could hurt him, or trust this woman, just for a moment, and reach out for the food. Finally, Rex took a cautious step forward. He hesitated, his body stiff with apprehension. But then something strange happened. The woman didn't make any sudden moves. She didn't rush him. She just stood there, watching him with patience and understanding. Rex closed the distance and gently took the meat from her hand. The act was simple, but it meant more than just food. It was a sign, one that Rex was beginning to understand. He didn't know if this woman could replace Martinez, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. There were people out there who cared, people who were willing to give him a chance. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. Though the food was nourishing, the act of trust didn't come easily to Rex. Every day, the woman would return, and each time she would bring food and speak softly to him. She never tried to force herself on him, never demanded that he come closer than he was comfortable with. She understood that trust had to be earned, and Rex had long since learned to be cautious of strangers. There were moments when he thought of Martinez. How could he ever trust another person again? Martinez had been his partner, his family. But now, he was gone. The scent of his handler still lingered in the deepest corners of Rex's mind, but it grew fainter each day. The shelter was full of dogs with different histories. Some were strays, others had been surrendered by their owners. But Rex's story was different. He had been a working dog, a canine officer with a sense of purpose. Now, he was just a shadow of what he once was. And yet, every time the woman appeared, he found himself wanting to take a small step forward. But it was hard. The past weighed on him, and the fear of more abandonment lingered in his chest like a stone. One afternoon, the woman sat on the floor outside his cage, a ball in her hands. She didn't move, simply waiting for him to decide whether or not he would approach. Rex had never been much of a player. His mind was always on the job, focused on the task at hand. But something about her patience made him reconsider. His curiosity slowly began to overpower his fears. With a hesitant movement, Rex moved closer. He sniffed at the ball, but didn't touch it. The woman smiled. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. "Take your time." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Rex felt something other than hunger or fear. He felt something warm, a glimmer of the bond he had once shared with Martinez. It wasn't the same, of course, but it was a start. It was a reminder that not all humans abandoned those they cared about. And for that brief moment, Rex allowed himself to hope. The hope Rex had felt started to dim as the days dragged on. The shelter, though kind and caring, was no place for a dog like him. His muscles, once toned and strong, were beginning to atrophy. His once shiny coat had dulled, and his ribs were now visible beneath his fur. The food the shelter gave him was enough to keep him alive, but it did little to heal his soul. He couldn't forget Martinez, couldn't forget the life he had once had. Rex's mind was in turmoil. He was caught between the need to trust and the fear of further abandonment. No matter how much the woman tried to connect with him, no matter how much she offered him food, there was something inside him that couldn't let go. The thought of being left again paralyzed him. What if he let his guard down, only to have his heart broken once more? The loneliness began to seep in again, stronger than before. Rex stopped responding to the woman's calls. He stayed curled up in his bed, barely eating or drinking. The others in the shelter, too, began to notice the change. The volunteers who had once admired Rex's strength now saw a shell of the dog he had been. He was no longer the proud K9 officer. He was just another abandoned dog waiting for someone to take him home. One morning, Rex couldn't ignore the gnawing hunger in his stomach. But even then, he didn't rise to meet the food the woman had placed outside his cage. Instead, he lay still, staring at it, wondering if he could ever be whole again. A week passed after Rex had pulled away again. The shelter volunteers were beginning to worry about him. His emotional withdrawal was apparent to everyone, and his once proud, strong posture now seemed fragile. Rex spent his days lying in his cage, barely responding to the food, the walks, or the calls of the volunteers. Then, one morning, a new visitor came to the shelter. She was tall and walked with purpose, her eyes scanning the room as if she were searching for something specific. She approached the front desk and exchanged a few words with the shelter staff. Rex, lying in his corner, took little notice, too caught up in his own thoughts to care about the comings and goings around him. But then, something happened. The woman walked over to his cage. She was different from the others. She didn't kneel down, nor did she speak in that familiar, soothing voice. Instead, she stood there silently, watching him from a distance. Rex, despite himself, couldn't help but look at her. There was something about the way she carried herself, an air of quiet determination that caught his attention. The woman didn't approach him right away. She waited, giving Rex the space to decide whether or not he wanted to make the first move. For a moment, Rex simply stared at her, his eyes searching for something, anything, that would explain why she was here. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "I know you've been through a lot, buddy," she said softly, "but I'm here to offer you something you might not have had in a long time. A second chance." Rex's ears perked up slightly, and his tail twitched at the sound of her voice. Something about it felt different, less forced. But Rex was still cautious. He had heard similar words before, from other volunteers who had promised him better days, only to leave him behind again. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, something Rex couldn't quite place, but that stirred a faint memory of his time with Martinez. A memory of trust, of loyalty, of protection. The woman seemed to understand his hesitance and didn't push him. She simply remained standing at a distance, allowing him to decide for himself. Rex took a cautious step forward, his body trembling slightly. His instincts told him to be wary, to keep his guard up. But another part of him, buried deep inside, was beginning to believe that perhaps he wasn't alone in this world after all. Maybe, just maybe, this woman was here to help him find his way back. The next few days saw a gradual shift in Rex's behavior. The woman, whom the shelter staff called Sarah, continued to visit him every morning. Unlike the other volunteers, Sarah didn't try to force a bond with Rex. She simply let him take his time, offering him treats and quietly sitting with him during her visits. She seemed content just being there, allowing Rex to make the first move. For the first time in weeks, Rex felt a glimmer of hope. Sarah's presence was comforting, yet non-invasive. She wasn't trying to be a replacement for Martinez, but she did remind Rex of what it felt like to trust again. Slowly, the walls Rex had built around himself began to soften. He would approach her more often, allow her to pet him, and even play with the toys she brought for him. The shelter staff noticed the change, and they couldn't help but smile. Rex was beginning to heal. The spark that had once seemed lost in his eyes was slowly returning, and his coat, though still thin, began to regain some of its former shine. It was as if, with each day that passed, Rex was taking one more step toward accepting the reality of his new life. One afternoon, Sarah came to visit with some good news. She told Rex that she had spoken with the shelter about taking him home with her. The idea of leaving the shelter, of starting fresh in a new place, was both exciting and terrifying. Would she be like the others who had promised him a better life but left him behind? Or was Sarah different? Rex's heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. This was a new beginning, a chance at a life beyond the shelter. But as the days passed, he couldn't help but wonder, could he truly trust again? The thought of leaving the shelter, of finally escaping the loneliness that had consumed him, was almost too much to bear. Rex wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew that with Sarah by his side, maybe, just maybe, he could find the strength to take the leap. The day finally arrived. Rex stood at the front of his cage, his paws pressed against the cool bars. His mind was filled with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Sarah had been coming every day, and today she had promised him that it was time. Time for him to leave the shelter behind and step into a new life, one where he wasn't just another abandoned dog. He was about to become someone's companion again, someone who wanted him, someone who would love him unconditionally. Sarah arrived that morning with a leash in hand, her face warm with a reassuring smile. "Are you ready, Rex?" she asked softly. "It's time to go home." Rex's heart beat faster, and he looked up at Sarah, unsure. But she was calm, her voice steady and reassuring. She knelt down to his level, looking into his eyes with such tenderness that Rex felt a weight lift from his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he could trust again. With a slow, hesitant movement, Rex stepped forward, allowing Sarah to attach the leash. It was the first time in a long time that he had willingly walked towards something, not in fear, but in hope. As Sarah led him out of the shelter, Rex took in a deep breath of fresh air. It felt like freedom, like the possibility of something new. This was the beginning of a new chapter in Rex's life, one where trust, love, and companionship were no longer out of reach. The ride to Sarah's house was quiet, but Rex felt the tremor of excitement deep inside him. The car was a foreign place. He hadn't been in one for a long time. The hum of the engine was soothing, and the world outside the window rushed by, unfamiliar and full of promise. He sat quietly in the back seat, his ears alert to every sound, his nose pressed to the window, taking in the new scents that filled the air. Sarah glanced back at him, smiling softly. "We're almost there, buddy," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, and somehow Rex trusted it. He had learned to trust her over the past few weeks, and now he was beginning to feel the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time, the sensation of belonging. When they pulled into the driveway of Sarah's house, Rex felt his heart beat a little faster. The place was quiet, nestled in the woods just outside the city, and it felt peaceful. Sarah opened the door and let Rex step out into the yard. His paws touched the soft grass, and for the first time since he'd left the precinct, Rex felt the warmth of the sun on his back. It was different from the harsh, artificial lights of the shelter. "Welcome home," Sarah said, her voice full of affection. She unclipped the leash and let Rex roam freely for the first time in a long while. At first, he hesitated, sniffing the ground and taking cautious steps, but then he began to explore, each step giving him a little more confidence. There were no loud noises here, no cages, no other dogs vying for attention. This was his space, his new world. As he explored the yard, Rex noticed a few things. There were toys scattered across the lawn, a few balls, a frisbee, and even a small kiddie pool filled with water. It seemed like Sarah had prepared for him to feel welcome, to feel at home. It was more than he had ever expected. That evening, after a long day of exploration, Sarah fed him a proper meal, one that smelled delicious. Rex ate hungrily, savoring the taste, but there was something else there too, something deeper. As he finished, he looked up at Sarah. Her smile was soft, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise. She wasn't going anywhere. She was here to stay. That night, Rex curled up on the soft bed Sarah had made for him, and for the first time in a long time, he slept peacefully. No more nightmares of abandonment, no more loneliness, just quiet, contentment, as he drifted off into a deep, restful sleep. The first few days in Sarah's home were a whirlwind for Rex. There were so many new things to get used to. The unfamiliar sounds, the smells of different people coming and going, and, of course, the sudden shift from the cold and sterile shelter environment to a warm, welcoming home. It was a lot to process. Rex, however, seemed to adjust well. At first, he stayed close to Sarah, never venturing too far from her side. He was still wary of everything and everyone outside of her immediate presence, but he was no longer as anxious as he had been in the shelter. Each day, Rex grew a little bolder. He began to explore more of the house, from the cozy living room where Sarah would sit and watch TV to the quiet bedroom where Rex had slept for the past few nights. Sarah, noticing how cautiously Rex moved, took things slow. She would give him time to acclimate and never forced him into situations that might overwhelm him. She would sit quietly with him, offering gentle encouragement without pushing him too hard. Slowly but surely, Rex began to trust her more. One morning, Sarah woke up to find Rex standing by the door, his tail wagging ever so slightly. It was a small sign, but it was a sign of progress. Rex had started to trust his new environment. Sarah smiled softly, not wanting to ruin the moment. Instead, she slowly got up, letting him follow her into the kitchen, where he was fed a hearty breakfast. She knew it would take time, but seeing Rex begin to adjust was a sign that the healing process was working. She wasn't rushing it. There was no need. As the days passed, Sarah continued her routine with Rex, taking him on long walks through the neighborhood, playing with him in the yard, and slowly introducing him to new faces. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments of hesitation when Rex would freeze at unfamiliar sounds or retreat into a corner. But there were also moments where he would nuzzle against Sarah, showing her how far they had come. It was clear that Rex was starting to feel safe again. Weeks passed, and Rex began to settle into his new life. He no longer needed to be coaxed out of his shell. He trusted Sarah completely now, following her wherever she went, his head resting on her lap as they sat together in the evenings. He knew that she wasn't going to leave him like the others had. He had learned to trust her in ways he never thought possible again. There were moments when Rex would be reminded of his past, of Martinez, of the work he had done, and the loyalty he had shown. But those memories no longer haunted him. Instead of bringing pain, they brought a sense of pride, a quiet understanding that he had given his best. And now, in this new chapter, he could still offer that same loyalty. But this time, it would be to someone who needed him just as much as he needed her. One evening, Sarah took Rex for a walk down the quiet street outside their house. It was a cool evening, the air crisp with the promise of fall. As they walked side by side, Rex's tail wagged gently, and for the first time, he felt like he was truly home. He wasn't just a former K9, he was a beloved pet, a companion, and a cherished member of the family. Sarah glanced down at him and smiled, reaching down to give him a gentle scratch behind the ears. "You're doing so well, Rex," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Rex looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. He had been through so much, but now he had a future, one filled with love, comfort, and a family that would never abandon him. As weeks turned into months, Rex continued to grow more comfortable in his new home. Sarah's house, which had once felt so strange and intimidating, now felt like his sanctuary. Rex had made a habit of following her from room to room, staying close to her, even when she didn't need him by her side. He had learned to appreciate the quiet moments in their home, the peaceful days spent lounging on the couch or lying at her feet as she worked on her computer. Despite the peace he had found in his new life, Rex's past was never too far from his thoughts. Occasionally, memories would surface, of the streets he had once patrolled, of the bond he had shared with Martinez. There were moments when he would look out the window, his mind drifting, and wonder what happened to his old life. But those thoughts never stayed long. Sarah's presence, her steady calm, was always there to pull him back into the present. One afternoon, Sarah invited a friend over to the house. It had been a while since Rex had met anyone new, and he wasn't sure what to expect. At first, he was hesitant, staying near Sarah and watching the newcomer from a distance. But when Sarah introduced the woman, explaining that she was a dog lover who volunteered at a nearby shelter, Rex began to relax. The woman knelt down to his level and offered him a treat, and after a few minutes of quiet interaction, Rex allowed her to pet him. It was a small step, but a significant one. Rex had grown to trust Sarah fully, and now he was learning to extend that trust to others, one step at a time. It was a slow and steady process, but Sarah was patient, letting him take the lead in his own healing. Over time, Rex's life with Sarah became defined by routine. He knew exactly when it was time for his walks, his meals, and even when Sarah would take a break in the afternoon to relax. It was a comforting consistency that gave Rex a sense of stability he had longed for. Each day, he found new ways to bond with Sarah, whether it was through play, cuddling, or simply sitting side by side as they both watched the sunset together. Sarah's care and attention made all the difference in Rex's healing. She made sure to keep him active, taking him on long walks through the neighborhood, letting him run free in the backyard, and even attending occasional training sessions to reinforce basic commands. Though Rex had once been a highly trained K9, these training sessions were more about bonding and communication than work. One evening, after a particularly long walk, Sarah sat down on the couch, and Rex laid his head in her lap, feeling the steady rhythm of her hand as it gently scratched behind his ears. It was a moment of complete peace, and for Rex, it was everything he had ever needed. No longer was he a working dog with a job to do. He was simply Rex, a beloved pet, cherished and cared for in a way he had never thought possible. As the days passed, Rex began to notice how much he had changed. He had become more playful, more open, and more confident in his relationship with Sarah. He still had moments of anxiety, particularly when he was introduced to new situations or people, but his bond with Sarah gave him the security he needed to overcome his fears. One weekend, Sarah decided it was time for a change of scenery. She had been planning a day out to the park, and although Rex wasn't sure how he would handle being around so many people and dogs, he trusted her enough to give it a try. The park was bustling with life. Children were running, playing, and laughing, while other dogs were chasing after balls or splashing in the pond. Rex froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer number of new sounds and smells. He stayed close to Sarah, his body tense with uncertainty. Sarah noticed his hesitation and knelt down beside him, offering him a gentle touch and speaking softly. "You're okay, Rex. We can leave if you're not ready," she reassured him. But Rex didn't move away. Instead, he turned his attention to a nearby dog, a friendly golden retriever wagging its tail. Sarah encouraged him to approach, and after a moment of hesitation, Rex slowly walked over. The golden retriever sniffed him, and Rex, though cautious, reciprocated. It wasn't long before they were both walking together, exploring the park as a team. By the end of the day, Rex was more relaxed, enjoying the feeling of grass beneath his paws and the freedom of running without the constraints of a leash. It was a small victory, but for Rex, it was monumental. It showed him that he was capable of more than just surviving. He was capable of thriving. As much as Rex had healed, there were still challenges ahead. The world outside of his small family unit still seemed unpredictable, and some days his anxiety resurfaced. The sound of sirens would send him cowering under the table, and loud noises would cause him to retreat to the safety of his bed. But Sarah, ever patient, recognized the signs of his distress and worked with him to help him regain his confidence. She would play calming music, take him for walks when he was feeling anxious, and use positive reinforcement to reward him when he faced his fears. Over time, Rex learned that while the world was full of unpredictability, Sarah would always be there to help him navigate it. She had become his anchor, the one constant in a world that had once been full of chaos and confusion. Rex began to trust more deeply, not just in Sarah, but in himself. He no longer felt the need to hide when something startled him. Instead, he would turn to Sarah for comfort, and she would reassure him with a soft word or a gentle touch. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was progress. One afternoon, Sarah left Rex in the care of a trusted neighbor while she went out to run some errands. Rex had become comfortable in his new home, but the idea of being left behind again stirred old fears. He had learned to trust Sarah, but he couldn't shake the memories of being abandoned before. When Sarah returned a few hours later, Rex was waiting at the door, his tail wagging furiously. It was a test for both of them. Rex needed to know that she would return, and Sarah needed to prove to him that he wasn't going to be abandoned again. Sarah knelt down and wrapped her arms around him, whispering words of reassurance. "I'm not going anywhere, Rex. I promise. You're home, and you're not leaving it." That moment solidified something in Rex's heart. He no longer worried about Sarah leaving him behind. She had proven that she would always come back for him. This was the loyalty he had been seeking, a bond stronger than any fear or doubt. A few months later, Rex was beginning to find his own way in the world again. The quiet moments he shared with Sarah continued to be the highlight of his day. But now, he was also learning to embrace new experiences. Sarah had introduced him to a local dog park, and this time, Rex was excited rather than hesitant. He ran and played with other dogs, his tail wagging in a way it hadn't for a long time. Sarah watched him with pride, knowing how far he had come. It wasn't just about the trust he had placed in her, it was about the strength he had found within himself. Rex was no longer a broken dog. He was a survivor, and he had earned his place in this world alongside the woman who had never given up on him. As Rex became more comfortable with his new life, he also started meeting other dogs in the neighborhood. One day, while out on a walk, Sarah introduced him to a playful border collie named Max. Max had a friendly, eager energy, and Rex, still learning to trust others, was hesitant at first. But Max's playful approach and lack of aggression slowly won Rex over. Over the course of several weeks, Rex and Max began to form an unlikely but strong bond. Max would nudge Rex playfully, trying to get him to chase after sticks or run around the yard. At first, Rex would stand back, unsure, but soon he found himself joining in. The two dogs would run together, playfully tumbling across the grass, as Sarah watched with a proud smile. It was a new chapter in Rex's healing process. He was learning how to be a dog again, not just a retired K9, and Max played a big role in that. With every play session, Rex's confidence grew, and so did his joy. One day, as Sarah and Rex were walking down their street, they encountered a couple of strangers walking their dog. Rex, still a bit wary of unfamiliar faces, instinctively stepped behind Sarah. The dog they were walking was a large German Shepherd, and it reminded Rex of his past, his K9 days, working alongside other dogs like him. The German Shepherd barked excitedly, and Rex froze. He felt a wave of unease and tension, as memories of the police work he had done came rushing back. Sarah noticed Rex's discomfort and gently guided him to the side, reassuring him with soft words. "I know, buddy, you're okay," she said. "You're not in that world anymore." The encounter served as a reminder of the challenges Rex still faced. While he had made incredible progress, his past was never too far away. But Sarah's gentle reassurances allowed Rex to regain his composure. He wasn't the same dog he once was. He didn't have to fight anymore. Now, he could simply be himself. Sarah had noticed how much Rex had come to enjoy the dog park, so she decided to take him there for a special afternoon out. It was a quiet day, with only a few dogs around, which made it easier for Rex to feel at ease. This time, he wasn't hesitant to run off and explore. His tail wagged in excitement as he made his way around, sniffing trees and investigating the new scents in the air. Max was already at the park, waiting for Rex to join him. The two dogs took off together, running and playing like two old friends. They chased after balls, wrestled in the grass, and even tried to leap into the pond to cool off. For a moment, it was as though Rex was no longer haunted by the past. He was living in the moment, just enjoying life as a dog. Sarah watched the two dogs with a smile. She knew that these moments were vital for Rex's growth. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. As Sarah and Rex spent more time together, their bond grew deeper. Rex, who had once been so independent and focused on his work as a K9, had learned to rely on Sarah in ways he had never done with anyone else. He would follow her everywhere, seeking her out when he needed comfort and waiting for her at the door whenever she left. It was during these moments that Sarah realized how far they had come. Rex was no longer the dog who had been abandoned, who had been broken by the world. He was a dog who had learned to trust again, who had found love and safety in Sarah's care. One evening, after a long walk, Sarah sat down on the couch, and Rex immediately curled up beside her. His head rested gently in her lap, his eyes soft and content. It was a moment of pure peace. Sarah ran her fingers through his fur, marveling at how far he had come. She couldn't help but smile. "You're my best friend, Rex," she whispered. For the first time in a long time, Rex began to remember what it felt like to play. Sarah had bought him a few toys, from a squeaky ball to a tug rope. At first, Rex wasn't sure what to do with them. He had never had the luxury of playing as a dog, not when he'd been on duty all those years. But with Sarah's encouragement, Rex slowly began to learn how to play. The first time he grabbed the squeaky ball, he wasn't sure what to make of it. He pawed at it cautiously, nudging it with his nose, and when it made a squeaky noise, he jumped back in surprise. But after a few moments, he gave it another try, this time picking it up in his mouth and running around with it in triumph. Sarah laughed, watching her dog rediscover the joy of play. It was a breakthrough moment for Rex, a sign that he was not only healing, but also finding joy in life again. Despite the progress Rex had made, he still had some lingering fears. One afternoon, as Sarah and Rex walked through the neighborhood, a loud truck passed by, honking its horn. The sound startled Rex, and he immediately froze, his ears pressed flat against his head. He looked to Sarah for reassurance. Sarah, ever the patient and understanding owner, slowed her pace and spoke gently. "It's okay, buddy. It's just a truck." She stayed calm, offering him treats and reassuring words until he began to relax again. She could tell it would take time for Rex to get used to certain noises. But she knew that with each moment like this, Rex was getting stronger, overcoming his fears one at a time. One evening, Sarah received a surprise. She had been volunteering at a local animal shelter, helping to train dogs and assist with adoptions. One day, she brought home a small puppy named Daisy, a golden retriever mix who had been rescued from an abusive home. Rex at first wasn't sure how to handle the new arrival. He was used to being the only dog in the household, but Sarah carefully introduced them, letting Rex get used to Daisy's presence before allowing them to interact. It took time, but soon enough, Rex and Daisy became fast friends. Rex, with his nurturing nature, took on a protective role with the small puppy, guiding her through the house and showing her how to navigate the yard. Daisy, in turn, brought out a playful side of Rex that had been hidden for so long. As months passed, Rex's transformation continued. He had gone from a broken, starved dog, abandoned and neglected, to a happy, healthy companion in Sarah's life. The road to recovery had been long, but every step had been worth it. Rex had finally found his place in the world, right next to Sarah. Rex had learned to trust again. He had learned to love. And most importantly, he had learned that no matter what happened in his past, he was worthy of a second chance. He was worthy of a family. And he had finally found it in Sarah. One day, Sarah signed Rex up for a basic obedience class to help him become more accustomed to other people and dogs. At first, Rex was a little nervous. The training space was filled with unfamiliar smells, sounds, and several other dogs. He stayed close to Sarah's side, his body stiff, unsure of what to expect. However, Sarah's calm presence reassured him. She gently coaxed him to follow basic commands like sit and stay, with treats and praise. Slowly, Rex began to respond to her with more confidence. He looked to Sarah for guidance, trusting that she would lead him through the situation. By the end of the session, Rex had made significant progress. He wasn't the perfect student, but he had proven to Sarah and himself that he was capable of learning and adapting. It was a huge step forward in his healing process. To celebrate Rex's progress, Sarah decided to take him on a trip to the beach. Rex had never seen the ocean, and Sarah was excited to introduce him to the wide expanse of water and sand. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to captivate Rex, who cautiously walked toward the water, his paws sinking into the cool sand. At first, Rex hesitated, unsure of the waves that came and went. But after Sarah encouraged him, he stepped closer to the water and even splashed in the shallow surf. The joy in his eyes as he ran along the shoreline was undeniable. Sarah smiled, knowing that this was another milestone in his recovery. It was a day of freedom, of exploration, and of bonding. Rex was beginning to see that the world was full of new experiences, and many of them weren't as scary as he had once believed. Despite his progress, Rex's past still haunted him in moments of unexpected stress. One evening, during a thunderstorm, the loud cracks of thunder sent Rex into a panic. He ran around the house, barking and pacing, unable to calm down. His eyes were wide with fear, and he sought out Sarah, desperate for comfort. Sarah quickly gathered Rex into her arms, wrapping him in a soft blanket. She whispered soothing words to him, stroking his fur as the storm raged outside. She understood that storms were something Rex needed to work through, but it was hard to see him so frightened. That night, Sarah stayed by Rex's side, keeping him close until the storm passed. It was a reminder that while Rex had come so far, he still had deep-rooted fears that would take time to overcome. As the months went by, Rex's life continued to improve. His bond with Sarah deepened with each passing day, and he grew stronger, more confident, and more comfortable in his own skin. Rex learned that he didn't have to carry the weight of his past anymore. He had a new family, and they loved him for who he was, not for what he had been. Sarah often took time to reflect on how much Rex had changed. When he had first arrived in her life, he was a shell of the dog he had once been, starved, scared, and traumatized. Now, he was a healthy, happy dog who had a place in the world. But Sarah knew there was still work to be done. There were still fears to overcome, and there were still days when Rex would struggle with his past. But she was committed to helping him through it. Together, they would continue this journey, one step at a time. One afternoon, as Sarah and Rex were out on a walk, they had an unexpected scare. A car came speeding down the road, its engine roaring as it sped past them. The noise startled Rex, who bolted from Sarah's side, running toward the road. Sarah screamed, but without thinking, she dashed after him. In that moment, all the fear that Rex had been carrying seemed to surface at once. He was running, desperate to escape, but he didn't know where he was going. Sarah reached out, grabbing him by the collar just in time to pull him back onto the sidewalk. The car had long passed, but the rush of fear lingered in the air. Panting heavily, Sarah knelt down to calm him. "It's okay, Rex. You're safe." "You're okay," she repeated, soothing him with gentle strokes. Rex's heart was still racing, but he had found comfort in her touch. That close call served as a reminder of how vulnerable Rex still was, despite all the progress he had made. He still had moments where fear took over, but Sarah's presence would always bring him back to safety. As time went on, Sarah saw something special in Rex. His patience, his calm demeanor, and the way he instinctively comforted those around him made her think that perhaps he could do more than just heal himself. She began exploring the possibility of Rex becoming a therapy dog, helping others who were struggling, just as he had. Rex passed his therapy dog certification with flying colors. It was a proud moment for Sarah, and she knew it was the next step in his journey. By helping others, Rex would continue to heal and find purpose in his life. With Rex's new role as a therapy dog, Sarah began bringing him to hospitals, nursing homes, and schools to visit people in need of comfort. At first, Rex was unsure about meeting so many new people. He had spent much of his life learning to keep to himself, but he slowly adapted to his new role. The people he visited were always so happy to see him. Whether it was an elderly resident at a nursing home or a child recovering from an illness, Rex brought joy wherever he went. As he sat beside them, allowing them to pet him and talk to him, it became clear that Rex had a gift of unconditional love and healing. Over the following months, Rex's role as a therapy dog became more than just a job. It became a purpose. He thrived in the moments where he was able to connect with others, offering them the same comfort that Sarah had given him. His bond with Sarah grew even stronger as they continued to work together to bring joy to others. Rex's progress was nothing short of miraculous, From a scared, abandoned dog to a beloved companion and therapy dog, he had truly turned his life around. The emotional scars from his past still lingered, but they no longer defined him. As Rex's relationship with Sarah flourished, he took on a big brother role when Daisy, the golden retriever puppy, came into the picture. At first, Daisy's energy was overwhelming for Rex, who had grown accustomed to a more relaxed routine. But Rex was patient with her, teaching her the ropes of life in Sarah's home. Daisy, in turn, brought out a playful side of Rex that had been dormant for a long time. They played together, ran through the yard, and even curled up for naps beside each other. It was clear that Rex had become a mentor for Daisy, helping her adjust to her new home, just as Sarah had helped him. One day, Sarah decided to take Rex to the old training facility where he had spent so many years as a K-9 officer. Rex's reaction was immediate. He froze at the sight of the building. The memories flooded back, and for a moment, he seemed to retreat into himself. Sarah sat down beside him, offering him comfort. "It's okay, Rex. You don't have to be that dog anymore," she whispered. They didn't stay long, but it was enough for Rex to face a small part of his past and realize that he had moved on. He was no longer the dog he had been on those cold, harsh streets. He was a new dog, a dog who had found a family, a purpose, and a future. Max, the border collie, remained one of Rex's closest friends. They met regularly for playdates, running through the yard and chasing each other through the fields. The two dogs had a special bond, forged in their shared love of play and their mutual respect for one another. Rex had come a long way since the days when he was alone and isolated. Now he had a circle of friends, both human and canine, who cared for him deeply. 1 year after Rex's arrival in Sarah's life, they held a small celebration to mark the occasion. It was a joyous event, with friends, family, and neighbors all coming together to celebrate the incredible transformation Rex had undergone. Rex was the guest of honor, of course. Surrounded by those who loved him, he basked in the warmth and happiness of the day. It was a reminder that no matter how difficult the past had been, the future was full of love, hope, and new beginnings. As Rex settled more comfortably into his life with Sarah, he began to recognize the powerful gift he had, his ability to provide comfort. More than just a companion, Rex was now a therapy dog who was making a real difference in the lives of others. Each visit to a hospital, nursing home, or school felt more fulfilling than the last. He understood that his job was not just to heal himself, but to help others heal too. During one of these visits, Rex was approached by a young boy named Lucas, who had recently undergone surgery. Lucas had been quiet and withdrawn, not wanting to engage with anyone. But when Rex walked into the room, Lucas's eyes lit up. He reached out hesitantly at first, then stroked Rex's fur, smiling for the first time in days. The connection between them was immediate. It was moments like these that solidified Sarah's belief in the healing power of animals. Rex wasn't just her dog. He was a beacon of hope for others. With every visit, he transformed lives, including his own. Rex had never been fond of water, but Sarah was determined to help him overcome that fear. One sunny afternoon, she took him to a local lake, hoping that the calming environment would encourage him to dip his paws in. At first, Rex was hesitant, his body stiff and his eyes fixed on the water's edge, but Sarah patiently coaxed him, gently leading him closer. When Rex's paws finally touched the cool water, he froze. The sensation was unfamiliar, and it took him a few moments to adjust. Slowly but surely, Rex began to enjoy the water. He waded in up to his belly, then ventured further as the ripples splashed around him. By the end of the day, Rex was running through the shallow water, his tail wagging in pure joy. It was another victory for him, another fear overcome. Although Rex had come a long way in his recovery, Sarah knew that regular veterinary checkups were important for his overall health. During one of these visits, Sarah noticed Rex become anxious as soon as they stepped into the clinic. The smell of antiseptic and the unfamiliar surroundings triggered memories from his past. Sarah knelt beside him, gently speaking to him, her voice soothing and familiar. "You're okay, Rex. she said, giving him a treat to distract him. When it was Rex's turn to see the vet, Sarah stayed by his side, offering him comfort throughout the entire exam. While Rex was still nervous, he was learning to trust that Sarah would always be there to protect him. After the visit, Sarah rewarded him with a long walk in the park, and Rex's anxiety seemed to fade away as he took in the familiar sights and smells. Daisy, the playful puppy who had become part of their family, was growing quickly. Rex, once unsure about her energy, had come to embrace his role as her protector and guide. He helped teach Daisy how to behave around strangers and kept a watchful eye over her whenever they were outside. One day, Sarah took both dogs to a local pet store to pick out new toys. Daisy, ever the curious one, ran excitedly from aisle to aisle, while Rex followed at a slower, more deliberate pace. As they passed by the puppy section, Rex paused, sensing that Daisy had wandered too far. He trotted over, gently guiding her back towards Sarah. It was moments like these that made Sarah proud of how far Rex had come. He had gone from a dog who didn't trust anyone to a dog who was now looking out for others. Daisy had brought out the best in him. Sarah's childhood friend, Claire, had a farm about an hour away, and she invited Sarah, Rex, and Daisy to visit. Rex had never seen so many animals: horses, goats, chickens, and even a few cows. At first, Rex was wary of the unfamiliar creatures, but Sarah guided him through the farm at his own pace. When they reached the barn, Claire let Rex meet one of the horses, a gentle mare named Bella. Rex hesitated at first, but soon took a cautious step forward, sniffing Bella's coat. To Sarah's surprise, Rex seemed at ease with the horse, even standing quietly as Bella nuzzled him. The farm trip proved to be another turning point for Rex. He realized that not all animals were threats. Some could become companions, just like Max and Daisy. As time passed, Sarah became more and more grateful for the bond she shared with Rex. He wasn't just her dog, he was a symbol of resilience and recovery. Every day was a reminder of how far Rex had come, from the broken K9 who had been abandoned and starved, to the joyful, loving companion who now brought comfort to others. There were still moments of fear, moments where Rex's past would resurface. But with each challenge, he grew stronger, and Sarah was there to help him through it. Together, they had become a team, partners in healing, supporting each other through thick and thin. Rex had come to understand that the road to healing was long, but it was worth every step. With Sarah by his side, there was no challenge too big to overcome. To mark Rex's first year with Sarah, they held a small celebration at home. It was a day filled with treats, toys, and a special cake made just for dogs. Sarah invited a few close friends over, including Max and his owner, Lisa. Rex's tail wagged non-stop as he was showered with love from everyone in the room. The birthday celebration was a reminder of how far he had come and how much he had blossomed in the past year. From the abandoned, frightened dog Sarah had taken in to the confident, loving therapy dog he had become, Rex had truly transformed. That evening, Sarah sat with Rex, watching him happily devour his birthday cake. "Happy birthday, buddy," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You've come such a long way." As the days turned into months, Sarah and Rex's bond continued to grow stronger. Sarah knew Rex better than anyone, and Rex had come to trust her more than he had ever trusted anyone before. Their relationship had deepened beyond that of an owner and pet. It was a deep emotional connection that no one could break. Whether they were taking walks in the park, lounging on the couch, or visiting hospitals together, every moment spent with Rex was cherished. Sarah knew that their journey together was far from over. The healing process might never be fully complete, but it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was all they needed. One day, while out for a walk, Rex and Sarah stumbled upon a small, frightened stray dog hiding behind a dumpster. The dog was thin, trembling, and covered in dirt. Rex immediately approached the stray, his demeanor gentle and non-threatening. He sniffed the dog carefully, offering him a sense of calm and reassurance. Sarah called animal control, and while they waited for help to arrive, Rex stayed by the stray dog's side, offering comfort. When the shelter arrived, they took the stray dog in, and Sarah couldn't help but feel proud of Rex. Even though he had been abandoned in the past, he was now in a position to help others who were in need.